Welcome to the Archive Room podcast.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Faster Mai, I'm Judith Lay, and I'm very pleased to find you waiting for me at the door to the Archive Room, the place where we keep stories of island life in years gone by, told by the people who were there. So come on in, sit down and make yourself comfortable, and let's listen to this week's selection. It's so good to be back with you again with the programme I absolutely love to make. And thanks to the technical skills of our archivist, Tim Price, and to the excellent interviewing abilities of the late David Collister, we've another host of local characters to meet and a new feature a little later in the show. But let's begin by meeting up again with a lady we first encountered when we investigated the story of Jeff the Mongoose, the Dalby spook. She was 90-year-old Kathleen Green when David interviewed her, and he took her back to her childhood when, as Kathleen Christian, she was at school with Vorry Irving, the young girl who lived with Jeff, the talking mongoose. As far as the down-to-earth Kathleen was concerned, the fact that her school friend Vorry had a very particular skill was proof positive that the Dalby spook simply didn't exist.
People have told me that Vorry used to throw her voice as like a ventriloquist.
She could. I've heard her when she was going to school, throwing her voice up the field.
Really?
Yeah. And my cousin Anne said that she's been in the schoolyard and hearing voices coming out of the church, and she was terrified.
And none of your school friends ever saw anything of an animal that would...
Oh, Lord, no. There was no such a thing. There might have been a ferret about or a weasel or something like that. You know, living up in the wilds up there. She could very well have seen a ferret or a weasel, yes. But there was no such a thing as a spook, no.
But it's another side of Kathleen's young life we're going to hear about now. Kathleen Christian was born in 1912. She was the youngest of four, having 3 older brothers, and was born with very poor eyesight. But at least she had both parents to care for her, which is more than can be said for Kathleen's father, as David discovered when he asked Kathleen about him.
He was a good enough father to us. Oh, yes, he was.
He'd lost his own father when he was very young, had he?
When he was 12. His father died when he was 12, and the mother died very soon after.
Really?
And left 6 of them.
He must have had a hard time coming up then.
Well, an auntie took him. They were born at Foxdale, and an auntie that had a whole Scotch of kids, she took him to rear him. And he lived up at Foxdale with her till he was ready to leave school and all. And then he came down Dalby way to work on farms.
And met your mother then, did he?
And that's where he met my mother, Ella Quirk.
Ella Quirk?
Yeah.
Where did you go to school then?
Dalby school. Oh, I was all right at school.
You always had bad sight then, did you?
Not good sight, no. And my mother was told it was neglect at birth was wrong. And I think they had a lot of trouble when I was just little, because my mother and father had the money, you know, to take me to the specialists. And I think my grandfather was taking me to the specialist. And then when I was 13, Board of Education or somebody sent me and another girl from Douglas away to a blind school in Preston. So I was there from about March till Christmas in a blind home in Preston.
Yes.
Well, I couldn't learn Braille or anything.
No.
I couldn't do it. But I learnt a lot of other things, like, you know, art and music and those sort of things. I did well. But I had quite good eyesight, you know. I could ride a bike and all, you know, the same as everybody else.
Aye.
But one of our teachers told me, mother and father, that I could have been a school teacher had I had the eyesight.
Ah, right.
Yes.
So you're quite a bright girl then.
The brains, not the ability. Yes.
So what happened after you left school then?
I left school at 15, and then I went to work as a maid for a parson's wife. When I was 16, I went to Douglas to look after a little boy in a boarding house. I had complete care of him from morning till night. When I went there, I was 16 and he was 1, and I was with him all the time till he was 4. And then they paid me off because they could look after them themselves, as you know. But in the next summer, they discovered that they couldn't look after them, so they came out to get me, but they were too late. I got another job, and then I was working in a boarding house in Peel. Then I only did 1 year in a boarding house in Peel, and then my father bought a farm, and then we all went to live in the farm. Do you know Dalby at all?
Not very well.
You know the Nyavel Road corner?
Yes.
Well, isn't there a big house on the corner?
Yes.
Well, there, Ballycowan.
Ballycowan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I love farming.
Did you?
Yes. I wouldn't do anything in the house if I could help it.
You'd rather be out in the fields?
Out in the fields.
Kathleen Green, recalling the time when, as a young, single Kathleen Christian, she found her true home in the fields and freedom of farm life. I'm using David Collister's own words to describe my next 3 guests. They were all members of the House of Keys in the 1960s and 70s. David introduced them as formidable women, and the first person we're going to meet is Miss Jean Thornton-Duesbury. We could devote several programmes to Jean, and there would still be more to tell about a long life dedicated in so many ways to the service of others, from nursing to politics to guiding. From her little cottage on the coast road near Mackeld, she brought happiness and enjoyment, as well as a sound basis for life, to the many girls who were fortunate enough to pass through her guide company. And she was member of the House of Keys for Garth in the 1960s and through into the 1970s. But that's not actually what we're going to hear about now. The year is 1988. Miss Thornton-Duesbury is aged 81 and is explaining to David how her family first came to the Isle of Man.
Well, it's quite interesting, really. My grandfather, who was a soldier, came over here. He was a captain, came in charge of a small detachment of infantry, and they were quartered in Castletown. And he was unmarried, but he so fell in love with the Isle of Man, which he hadn't known before, that he retired from the army, went back to Yorkshire, married a Yorkshire girl, brought her over here, and they settled at what was then Glen Helen Private House, later the hotel. And there their first baby was born, who was my father.
Now, your father eventually became the Bishop of Soda and Man, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He was born in Glen Helen, baptised in Cronkyvoddy Church, the first entry on the baptismal register of that little church. Tremendous snowstorm at the time, and then later he became a clergyman, and he served a great deal in England, but then to his tremendous joy he came back to the Isle of Man as bishop in 1925.
Just to revert to your grandfather for a moment, we have here an extraordinary memento which involved a hunt in the Isle of Man. Now, tell me what this hunt was, as you know the story.
Yes, well, my grandfather kept the pack of harriers for hunting the hares in the Isle of Man, and they really did it in style. They had pink coats. I have a picture of them assembled outside the Manx Arms in Onken, setting off for a hunt, and I have a book with the names of all the people who went on the hunts. And another very interesting thing is that the railway, the steam railway, used to transport the dogs, the harriers, free of charge.
Really?
To the different places for these hunts.
So they had the hunts at various places around the island?
They did indeed. And then at the annual general meeting, which was held in one of the hotels in Douglas, my grandfather was thanking the Manx Steam Railway for their kindness in the transport of the pack.
This plaque, I take it, is probably solid silver, is it?
It is.
And the inscription on it says, presented to the master of the hunt, obviously, W.H. Thornton-Duesbury on his resignation by the members of the hunt, and it's dated 1883. Now that must be a prized and treasured possession of yours.
It is indeed, and I've left it to the Manx Museum, so it'll be there one day, I hope.
Now, what is this? Is this the hunting horn, then?
Now, this is the horn that was used at the hunt. I don't know if I can blow it or not.
Well, have a try.
It's very hard, but...
Tally-ho, tally-ho. Now, all of this was long before your time. The hunts had finished when you were growing up then.
Yes, oh yes. Unfortunately, I never knew my grandparents. They were dead before I was born, and I was born in London. But because of my father's tremendous love of the Isle of Man, we always came to the Isle of Man for holidays every year. From wherever we were in England. Father used to count the parishes as places where he worked. The Isle of Man was home, always.
Now, your father was Bishop of Sodrin Man from 1925 to 1928. What memories do you have of him?
Very happy indeed. The only thing was that although my father was made a bishop when he was only 58, and he died at 61, alas, it was cancer. They couldn't do as much in those days. So that illness made a cloud over it the latter part of the time there. But it was so happy because he loved it. And on the Tuesdays during the summer, he used to keep open house for all the visitors, and they would come out, sometimes 200 on the train.
Yes.
And they would get off the train. There was a stop at the bottom of the field, just below Bishopscourt, and they'd all come streaming up there, and then he would greet them, and then he would take them for a walk all round and point out all the things of interest and take them up the glen and then into the chapel, and they'd sing a hymn and have a little prayer, and he would sign postcards for them, and we used to have a crowd of people every Tuesday like that.
Now, by this time, you were in your late teens, early 20s,
Yes.
weren't you? What sort of friends did you have? What sort of a life did you have then as a young girl?
Oh, I had great fun because, you see, for one thing, part of the house was a theological college. So there were a lot of young men. And we had a hockey team, for one thing, both mixed hockey and ladies for Bluff and Michael, and the students all joined in. And we also had a lot of tennis parties because we had our own tennis court and so on. And so we had a lot of tennis, and we had picnics, and we had tremendous fun. It was, a very gay life, very happy life.
The bishop would have had servants then, would he?
Oh yes, indeed. Such an entirely different life. I think we had about 4 or 5 indoors and 3 or 4 out in the grounds. Of course, my parents did a lot of entertaining because they were very, very anxious all the time that Bishopscourt should be a home for the people of the Isle of Man. And so everybody was always welcomed, and they were always entertaining and giving parties and inviting the people to the house and grounds.
To take you on much further in life, isn't it rather strange that you would be an MHK at the time that the Bishopscourt issue arose for the nation?
Yes, that caused me very, very great distress. I was actually, of course, on the Ecclesiastical Committee of Tynwald, and I did my very utmost that the island should keep Bishopscourt. But it just seemed it was not to be, but I fought really every inch of the way, as far as I was concerned, in every way I could, because I still feel that it was a very wrong move.
Did you take part in Isle of Man events, music festivals, that sort of thing?
I used to go to them. I didn't take very much part in them. I think I was just 17 when we went there. Now, today, anybody of 17, can be married and have had their first child, if not second. I think we were much younger in those days somehow. And I'd come straight from school. I was a very outdoor person. I had poultry. I had dogs. I had ducks up on the lake in Bishopscourt Glen. I loved outdoor things and walking. And I did take the Sunday school at Bishopscourt, and I also had a missionary band, of which a number of older people in the island today have very happy memories, both in Kirkmichael and at Bishopscourt.
Tell us about that. What the missionary band? What did you do?
Well, we used to have, of course, teaching about other countries and other people, and then we did plays sometimes.
Didn't you have musical ambitions too?
Yes, I always felt that I would love to sing. And I went in for lessons to the late Mr. Noah Moore, who's a very well-known name in the Isle of Man.
And what happened?
Well, I never got very far, but I remember him saying to me, you shouldn't be trying to sing. You should be an elocutionist. Well, I had no desire along that line, but he said to me a most interesting thing. He said, you've got a voice that's perfectly produced. It would carry. I don't mind telling you that's got me into trouble many times. It's carried at the wrong times, but still. Well, you see, Mr. Noah Moore, the older people will remember, he was manager at Villa Marina, and he said if you were on the platform of Villa Marina, there were no microphones in those days, you could be heard in every part of the building. Well, years later, 50 years later, when I was chairman of the Board of Education, the schools gave physical training display, and as chairman I had to speak for about 10 minutes in the interval, in the middle, and all the mechanical appliances went wrong, and there were no microphones, there was nothing. And I had to fulfill Mr. Moore's prophecy and speak from the platform. But people said they could all hear everywhere.
A voice that I'm sure will be recognised and fondly remembered by many of us, Miss Jean Thornton-Duesbury. Two MHKs who were both first elected in 1971 didn't know each other, had never met before, but over time became good friends. And they're Mrs. Elspeth Quayle, who was MHK for Castletown from 1971 to 1981, and Miss Katherine Cowin, who was MHK for Douglas East from 1971 to 1976. When she retired, Elspeth moved off the island to live in Gloucestershire, and when David met up with her, she was coming to the end of an enjoyable holiday back here on the island, staying with her good friend Katherine Cowin. And it's perhaps worth bearing in mind that the conversation we're going to listen to was recorded about 30 years ago.
Were you then the only two ladies in the Keys at the time?
No, Miss Jean Thornton-Duesbury had preceded us and was still in the Keys.
In fact, to find three ladies in the Keys, or indeed in Tynwald, is quite unusual here in the Isle of Man, isn't it, really? Ladies haven't sort of followed a political career very much.
No, they haven't. I can't think why not. It isn't very easy, I must submit, but there are many women in the island who have very keen brains, they have political sense, and they have the strength to put their views across.
Why did you stand for the Keys in the first place?
My brother, T.C. Khan, had had a very successful career, which ended in his untimely death. He was first chairman of the Airports Board. He was first chairman of the Health Service, yes. I'd always been keenly interested. Part of the family were politically interested. My father had been. He was an alderman of Douglas and was largely responsible for the reservoir. And because 3 farms and the church were drowned, he lost his seat on the council.
This is the Baldwin Reservoirs.
Yes.
Elspeth, when you joined or came into the House of Keys, it was for rather a different reason. There was a bit of a challenge involved, wasn't it?
There certainly was. I don't wish to go into that, but I can only tell you that the experience has stood me in very good stead. I'm adept still at reading laws, and as we've had a good deal of trouble in the sheltered accommodation where I am, I'm always sent down to the library to read the latest law, and it frightens my landlord very much. So I find it very useful.
You don't want to go into the political run-up to getting into the Keys, but you did tell me that you were astonished that you won, and you really didn't want to win, in fact.
More than astonished. When it came to the point, I was horrified.
You hadn't expected it?
No, I don't think I had.
You decided, though, that you were going to oppose one particular member, and for that reason you felt strong enough to go for the Keys. Did you have any acrimonious argument in the Keys as you remember it?
My main opponent was John Bell and Roy MacDonald also, and between the two of them they could create mayhem. And many times I have been called upon to say what I had said because the tape couldn't catch it in the hubbub. Now, on one occasion, John Bell, he was being absolutely frightful. And all of a sudden, the messenger came over with a glass of water. And I thanked him, and I thought, how very kind. And I didn't need it. And I put it down. And I was aware that there was kind of a hush which was unusual when I was speaking, and people were listening so intently. What had happened was that they had planned that they would send the messenger over with this water so that it was there handy for me to pour over John Bell's head. He sat just...
Who were the formidable politicians of your day, would you say? I mean, apart from yourselves.
I would, of course, pick out the Speaker, Charlie Carouche. He could think quicker on his feet than most people could. You know, he was wonderful. I mean, one thinks of the ones one thinks of with affection, Norman Crowe. Such an honest, extraordinary, charming person.
Catherine?
John Bolton was a friend of the family, and I thought, perhaps not a statesman, but he certainly was a careful, shrewd manager. His chief pride was that when we were hard up, round about 60s, in the early 60s, he had managed to keep the outgoing and the incoming even, and they didn't have to borrow anymore.
I couldn't let this go by without mentioning Percy Radcliffe, who was absolutely super, so down to earth and nice with it.
Looking back then, 20 years or so, and comparing with today, what differences do you feel there are now, perhaps in the political scene, in comparison to your time?
There is a great deal more money at the disposal of government, and that is largely due to the influx of new residents. I would be the first to admit that it is their money which is helping so very greatly with our hospitals, for example.
Elspeth Quayle, looking back on your 10 years now, what do you remember most about it?
Well, I suppose you look back the things that you enjoyed, and I enormously enjoyed the Board of Agriculture. Of course, I greatly enjoyed the Forestry Board.
Do you see any changes in the island now that when you come back to it?
Shall I say, I'm very surprised to see so many government buildings on lines that Miss Cowin was saying. It seems to me that for a very small number of people, one feels that the island is over-governed, and they are certainly very well paid. You were asking why there were so few women in, and I feel that, first of all, I mean, the majority of the women in my thing were not trained, quite frankly, to, speak up and look round. I certainly wasn't myself. I think that's why I was so nervous about it. With all the Women's Institute and other women's organisations, and indeed the children themselves, they've got such self-confidence now that I think it's going to be entirely different. And as the women bring a different point of view to most arguments, I think it's invaluable that there should be a number of women in.
The thoughts of two former MHKs, Elspeth Quayle and Katherine Cowin, recorded over 30 years ago, have a surprisingly modern feel about them, don't they? And now, we're finishing with something a little different. We've discovered a full-length radio play that was recorded and broadcast exactly 50 years ago in 1974. And it's going to be our first Archive Room serial with a new episode every week. It's the work of the Manx Radio Drama Group, talented actors drawn from other groups, including the Service Players, St Mary's Players and Russian Amateur Dramatic Society, and it's directed by Mrs Olga Gray of the Legion Players. Peter Neal will set the scene. But can you recognise any other voices in episode 1 of The Little Dark Cupboard?
The scene is the living room of a house in one of those sparsely inhabited areas of Dartmoor where neighbour may be separated from neighbour by a matter of miles. It is the mid-morning of a day in early September. Nothing whatever can be seen through the windows, for a thick, clinging mist has come down upon the moor, blotting out both curving landscape and jagged tor, muffling all sound, and giving one the odd and rather frightening feeling that time itself is held in suspension.
Bill, come on, we must. We can't stay out here. Oh, Bill, do for goodness sake come in. Do hurry.
All right, I'm coming. I say, look here, old girl, this is a bit thick. This is someone's private house. We can't just barge in.
I don't care if it's Buckingham Palace. If I'd stayed out there 1 minute longer, only one, you'd have had a raving mad wife on your hands. Like, what's his name in what's it called?
Not Rochester and Jane Eyre by any chance?
Oh, yes, that's the one. Well, you wouldn't have liked that very much, would you, Bill?
Well, perhaps not just at first, but I guess I'd get used to it in time, you know. That's better.
Oh.
After all, Eva, what's wrong with a bit of fog now and then? What's there to be scared of? Fog's part of our glorious national heritage.
You call that a bit of fog? Just look at it. Oh, it's...
Eva, what is it? What's the matter?
I just can't bear it, Bill. I just can't bear it.
See, come and sit down, dear. There, that's better, eh?
I'm afraid I've made rather a scene, Bill. I'm so dreadfully sorry.
Now, don't try to talk. Just relax while I get you a nip from the old brandy flask. That'll put you right in no time.
Oh, it was seeing the fog pressed against the window. It made me feel shut in, trapped. That's what I can't stand, Bill. To be shut in.
Claustrophobia. Fear of enclosed spaces. You needn't think you're unique. Lots of people have it.
Then lots of people won't mind hell so very much after all, if hell's their fate. They'll have had a taste of it here on earth already.
Oh, here you are. Now stop being intense, love, and take a good swig of this. Come on.
Do you remember that ghastly evening when we went by tube to Sadler's Wells, and the thing stopped between stations for 10 whole nightmare minutes? Do you know, I'd have given 10 years of my life to have been out of it and free. I've never been in a tube since, and I never will. I'd rather crawl for miles on my hands and knees. Miles and miles.
Not that you ever do. Oh, no. You take expensive taxis instead. Well, let's hope that the official receiver suffers from claustrophobia too. It may help him to understand. Brandy, dear. Lovely, warm, mellow brandy.
Oh, thank you, Bill.
Well, go on. Drink.
Oh, dear.
And again. Go on. Better? Good.
Oh, how dreadful it is for you, Bill, to be tied to a neurotic flibbity-gibbet like me.
Oh, I know. Night after night, I cry myself to sleep over it.
You know, you ought to have married a great whacking romp of a girl with no nonsense about her. Someone like that Brenda something or other you were so fond of once.
Brenda Kellaway.
Yes, that's the one. I wonder why the name Brenda always makes one think of someone vast.
Not a word against Brenda. She was a pet.
Oh, pet my foot. Her figure always made me think of the Albert Hall. I happen to be very fond of you myself, and Brenda loomed up as a rival.
Should Eva be worried that Brenda is about to loom large again? Will Eva come to regret those unkind words? Was it just brandy that Bill was so keen for Eva to drink? Come back to the archive room next Thursday for episode 2 of The Little Dark Cupboard. The cast is drawn from the Islands Drama Groups of 50 years ago, and a little later in the series I'll give you their names. But just for now, see how many well-known voices you can recognise when next we visit The Little Dark Cupboard. And I'll have more memories from great characters to share with you when we meet at the archive room door at the same time next week. But for now, let's turn off the lights and close the door. I'm Judith Lay saying thank you for listening and wishing you a very good evening.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.